Hey, hello, this is Shah with the podcast Thrive Not Survive After Abuse. You might hear a slightly different title than you have heard before, but I had some requests from people saying, hey, is your podcast only meant for people who are abused as a child? No, actually not. I wrote actually a book, Broken Silence, as most people know, and that is actually focused on all abuse, domestic violence and sexual abuse, um, in specific and not specifically child abuse. I was just a child abuse victim, and hence I thought there was some sort of a need for a podcast in that specific area. So, but if you have followed my podcast, I often talk about other forms of abuse and how to survive that as well, and how to thrive from that instead of just surviving. So, hence maybe a subtle name change is in place in this case. Okay, so having said that, we're still in the beginning of January, and in the beginning of January, we always think about okay, what's lying ahead of us in 2021 in this case, and what do we leave behind, right? And now, what's in the past is in the past. That's a common saying, but unfortunately, for a lot of people, that is not the case. And specifically in this case, abuse victims, they have a hard time to leave the past in the past. But one thing that I describe in my book Broken Silence is if I had to mention one thing that changed everything for me in overcoming abuse, it is forgiveness, right? And a lot of people say, "Wow, someone did something so awful and drastic to you. How can you truly forgive that person?" Um, well, let's look first at the word forgiveness by itself. It's it's more a verb than just a noun, right? So forgiveness is not a one-time act. If you had a quarrel with your partner maybe, and you broke her favorite coffee cup or something, then maybe you apologize, and then the other person say, "Hey, I I forgive you." Okay, so but I mean it in a different way, right? If the discussion around that coffee cup comes back every week, then I might say, "Oh, did you truly forgive me for it or not?" And so that's not the thing that I'm talking about. Forgiveness is something that you actually, have to remind yourself of, and I see that with myself, and I see that with other survivors as well. There are times that you actually feel that you have forgiven the person who did that to you, and there are times that you have a hard time doing that. Now, but here's a big difference, right? I have a close family member who actually was never able to forgive the same person who actually abused me, who abused her, and I could actually see that still weighs very heavy on her heart and on her life. And although my uncle, who already passed away, so he's no longer among us, it's still that feeling of hatred lives very strong um, in her. Now, to forgive does not mean to forget. I don't think I will ever forget what happened to me. And forgiveness is also not maybe direct what you do for the other person. But forgiveness has something to do that you give up on, as Sadhguru call, you give up on the bitterness that lives in you, and so that you don't carry that with you. Because if you do, it literally destroys you as a person. In best case, it makes you less cheerful and joyful in life, but in worst case, it could really bring you down and make you a very bitter, sometimes even a revengeful person. And you see often uh, abuse people who are abused and who become abusers themselves. If you look in what they've been through, they've never reached that point where they actually were able to forgive the other person. Now, it's not an excuse, of course, for if to do what you did, but it makes it more understandable because it literally poisons your heart and it's very likely that you are going to do things that you don't like yourself either, right? So my question for you today is, excuse me, excuse me. Um, my question for you today is, what grudges do you take from 2020 over into 2021? Yeah, we all want to have a better life, of course, in 2021. But like I said earlier this week, we always want to have a better life than the year before. So that's nothing new. But maybe this year was a little bit stronger in thing. After all, we had a pandemic, and most of us, if not all of us, have never lived through something like that. If, even only if you're really old, you might have lived through the pandemic that was happening in the last century, beginning of last century. Spanish flu, was that Spanish flu? And but none of us has actually been through something like that. The generation who has lived through the World War II also has that. That is also an older generation. That my parents and older have been through that. So this generation actually has, have not been affected by something that was a global thing. Pandemic was the first thing. So it's very understandable that you maybe have a grudge against a phenomena like the pandemic. So not maybe to a person, but to something that happened to all of us. And that could make you bitter. You could say, hey, that was an awful year, or you can, strangely enough, forgive that phenomena, and in other maybe things that you could learn from it, right? So people also often have asked me that. So how does that work? If you forgave your uncle, do you now think better of him? No, I don't think he's a good person at all. I just don't have any hate to him, and there was one instance. I think I mentioned it to in one of my earlier podcasts. Um, when my grandma died, I think that's about maybe 25 years ago or something. My uncle was still alive as well, and that's the first time I met him again. Now, mind you, I was already 35 at that time, so I must be maybe a little bit older. I'm a little bit mixed up with the timeline, but I must be between 35 and 40 when my grandma passed away, and that is when I met my uncle for the first time after maybe 20 years or so, and and my sister said, Jean, my uncle Roy will be there, and I'm not sure if I can stand that. I said, well, I'm not so sure either, to be honest. I know that I forgave him. Right, I didn't tell that, but that was going through my mind. But maybe that's just like a concept in your head. How will I act when I see that man? My sister asked if I would stay with her, if he would come and to us. And I walked into the room and where the family was gathering, and my uncle almost immediately walked towards me, and he had this, I think, a genuine, sincere, happy face, and he wanted to say happy to see you, but I just gave him a hand. I said, I'm here just to honor your mother, and you know why I don't actually want to see you, but I give you my condolences. And I felt so strong, um, and I must say I felt strong because I never developed after that point of forgiveness. I didn't develop any bitterness or hatred against that man, and that's actually a much more powerful tool than thinking that you have anger and hate towards him. And if that's only, I mean, it's not a research, but if that's only the case between me and my sister, and I could see her how weakened that her. I always wish for her that she could find that forgiveness too. In all the work that I did to help abuse victims, I must say I think it's always the hardest thing is to help your own siblings in things like this. But anyhow, my question to you is, what do you bring over from 2020 in your heart that you better leave behind, and not to just suppress it, right? But in your mind, but truly forgive it. right? See, maybe there's positive things in there. I mean, many things that I wished never happened in 2020, but many good things came out of that as well, right? Can you maybe see that from other things too? So forgiveness in your heart, it's maybe a good thing to try to do in before you really enter 2021, is maybe give it a few moments to think about it. All right, this was Jean from the podcast Thrive Not Survive After Abuse, and I'll hope to hear you back tomorrow. Bye bye.